Hello, everybody. Welcome to our video on turning fractions into percents. Okay, so for turning fractions into percents, a really important idea here is this idea of equivalent fractions. So, going to remind ourselves what equivalent fractions are. Okay, equivalent fractions have the same value but look different. Right, the numbers are going to be different, but they're going to be equal to each other. Equivalent is really just a fancy way of saying equal. Okay? And the rule to remember with equivalent fractions is that you can multiply or divide as long as you're doing it to the top and bottom, but you never add or subtract to get an equivalent fraction. And here's what I mean by that. So let's take a simple fraction. Let's say it's 1/2. Okay, we can multiply or divide anything we want and it stays equal to 1/2. So let's say I multiply the top and bottom by 2. If I do that, 1 times 2 is 2. 2 times 2 is 4. So 2/4 is still the same as 1/2, right? 2 is half of 4. If you cut a pizza into 4 slices and you get 2 of them, that's half the pizza. Okay, we can multiply the 1/2 by 5. If we do it to the top and bottom, 1 times 5 is 5. 2 times 5 is 10. So 5/10 is another way of saying 1/2, right? So if you cut the pizza into 10 and you get 5 slices, that's half the pizza. All right, but the thing sometimes people try, let's talk about the other way too. So you can multiply or divide. So if we had these fractions and we're trying to simplify or reduce, that's when we've done dividing. So if you look at 5 and 10 and you want to simplify that, you can see 5 goes into both of those numbers. Okay, so you divide, 5 divided by 5 is 1. 10 divided by 5 is 2. So you can reduce it to get back to the simplified form. Okay, so we multiplied, we divided. In each case, we did the same to the top and bottom. So one of the mistakes that people make is they sometimes try to get a denominator to be what they want it to be by adding. So let's say I had 1/2, and you want to get the denominator to a 4 instead of a 2. Okay, well, if you try to add 2 to the top and bottom, 1 plus 2 is 3. 2 plus 2 is 4. Okay, well, if we think about that, 1/2, which looks like that, is not the same as 3/4. 3/4 are cut into 4, and we have 3 of the 4 pieces. So if you try to add the same thing to the top and bottom, it's not going to keep the fraction the same. So we cannot do this. Okay, we always have to multiply the top and bottom. So in this case, if you want to get the 2 to a 4, you can't just add 2, you have to multiply by 2. Okay, that would give you the same thing we got here. Okay, so something to remember as we go forward. So another reminder about what percent means. Think about any time you have ever taken a test. If you got a perfect score, what percent is that? Well, a perfect score on a test is 100%. Okay, well, if that's the case, that means you got everything right. You got all the points, and that's 100%. A percent means it's always out of 100. So 100 out of 100 would be perfect. Okay, so the parts per 100% is what a percent means. We learned that a little bit the other day, but we need to keep that in mind as we're going forward. Okay. Well, if that's the case, and you're trying to change a fraction into a percent, what we want to do is we want to create a fraction that is out of, well, you guessed it, 100. Right? If percent means out of 100, if we can take our fraction and change it so that the denominator is 100, then we'll be able to see our percent pretty easily. Okay? So if I start out with this number 4/25, and I want to get the denominator to be 100, well, what do I have to do to 25 to make it 100? Okay. If you count by 25, you got 25, 50, 75, 100. So it looks like 4/25s make up 100. So to get that 25 to 100, I have to multiply by 4. Okay. Well, if I multiply the bottom by 4, I also have to multiply the top by 4. Okay, so I end up with 100 on the bottom. On top, I have 4 times 4 is 16. So 4/25 is equivalent to 16 hundredths. And well, if that's the case, then I can see my percent here. Well, because percent means out of 100, 16 hundredths is 16 out of 100. I'm just going to take my numerator, slap a percent sign on there, and there's my percent. Okay, so once you get the denominator to 100, whatever the numerator is, that's the percent that this fraction is equal to. Okay. All right, so let's get those steps down. So we're going from a fraction to a percent. We're going to find a number to multiply the denominator by to get 100. That's step number 1. So now some of you might be wondering, well, what if I have a denominator that doesn't easily go into 100? What do I do? Well, you're right. If your denominator does not go into 100, then we cannot use these steps. There's another method that we're going to try, but I'm going to save that one for the next video. So that's coming up. So for right now, all the ones we're going to deal with are kind of the easier ones where we have a way to get our denominator to be 100. Okay, so this is something we should always check first if we would need to turn a fraction into a percent. Okay, so after step 1, step 2 is multiply the numerator and denominator by that number. Again, we're always multiplying the same thing on top and bottom. That's very important. Step 3, the numerator with a percent sign is your answer. So just take the numerator and give it a percent sign. There's your answer. Okay, so make sure you have all 3 of these steps written down. You might need to pause the video to do that. That's okay. Resume it when you're ready, and we'll go over these next 2 examples. All right, so the first one here is write 1/2 as a fraction with 100 as a denominator. So I'm trying to turn 1/2 into a percent. To make it a percent, I don't want it to be out of 2. I want it to be out of 100. So I'm going to rewrite this fraction as something out of 100, just like I would if I were adding fractions and needed common denominators. Okay. So if I look at what happened to the bottom, well, to get from 2 to 100, I had to multiply by 50. 2 times 50 gives me 100. Okay. So that tells me if I multiply the bottom by 50, I have to also multiply the top by 50. 1 times 50 is 50. So 1/2 is the same as 50 out of 100. Once I have that denominator to be 100, 50 out of 100 means 50%. So I just take that numerator and give it a percent sign. There's my answer. 1/2 is 50%. Some of you may have already known that. Okay, let's try 3/4. So I'll do 3 out of 4. I want that to be a percent, so I need the denominator to be 100. To get from 4 to 100, what I have to do is multiply by 25. And I always have to do the same thing on top. So I'm times 75 on top as well. Sorry, 25. Okay, so 3 times 25 is 75. So 3/4 is 75 out of 100, which means as a percent, it's 75%. Okay. All right, so let's try a couple more. Here I have just a little reminder, a visual reminder of what's happening here as we're taking these fractions and writing them as equivalent fractions. What we're doing is we're just breaking our circle up in smaller pieces. So if you ignore these lines here and just look at these 2 circles, we can see each of these circles is half red and half blue. Right? The whole top half is red, the whole bottom half is blue. So this represents 1/2. One of the 2 sections is red. Okay. This fraction here, all we did is we added in a couple more lines to cut it into more pieces. I still have half the circle shaded, but this time out of the 6 wedges, 3 of them are red. So 3/6 is the same as 1/2. Okay, that's what we're doing when we multiply the top and bottom by something to get an equivalent fraction. Okay, in this case, this represents multiplying the top and bottom by 3. Okay. Same thing here. Right? If I look at this line, 2 of my 3 segments here are purple. So this represents 2/3. Okay. If I cut each of those segments into three smaller segments, you can see I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of 9. Right? So 6 out of 9 is the same as 2 out of 3. So if you're visual, this might help you to understand what's going on here. All right, so we're going to write an equivalent fraction with 100 as the denominator. So I got 21/25. I want to find a way, something I can multiply 25 by to get 100. and that number is 4. So 25 times 4 gives me 100. Well, if I multiply the bottom by 4, I got to multiply the top by 4. 21 times 4, if you need to write that down, go ahead. Multiply it out. 1 times 4 is 4. 2 times 4 is 8. So I get 84. 84 out of 100 means this is 84%. Okay. All right, let's try 3 out of 50. Okay, so 3 out of 50, I want to make it something out of 100. To get from 5 to 100, I have to multiply by 2. So to get for 3, I have to multiply that by 2 also, which gives me 6. So 6 out of 100 means 6%. Okay. Another thing that we can do to kind of just check to see if our answers make sense is to think in terms of more or less than half, right? If we compare these two answers, half would be 50%, right? So this 84% is more than half, which would make sense because 21 out of 25 is more than half, right? 21 is more than half of 25. So this is most of that 25. So we have something more than 50%. Over here, 3 out of 50 is not very much else, way less than half, right? Half of 50 would be 25. We're not even close to that. So I should get a number that's way smaller than 50%. And I do, I have only 6%. Okay, so go ahead and give those a try. And in the next video, we'll look at what happens when you can't get the denominator to be 100. Good luck.